Well, hello again. It's me. I promised earlier when I was up here that I'd give you a case study about PrairieFood, and I'm going to call on some more of the PrairieFood crew to help answer some commonly asked questions about PrairieFood, and I think some of those questions are coming into our Q&A boxes as well. So I have this alfalfa field here. The farmer is a woman. She's here today. And this is the field where we had the 2.5 point increase in soil organic matter. So I just wanted to show that to you. And this is actually our first successful pivot injection. So PrairieFood can go down on the field a number of different ways, including pivot injection. So the feed yard in southwest Kansas is our case study. And these results are from last year. They did put PrairieFood down again this year. I'm just getting that data coming in now. So this is a year old, but still, I think, very pertinent. So when our crew reached out to Brookover, this is Brookover Feed Yard, some of the issues that they mentioned to us were that they were seeing declining yields. So this, I think, is a common story that resonates with lots of different producers. Even though that they had tried to mitigate that and tried different strategies, increasing inputs, for example, they had locked up phos. In particular, there was one field they identified to me where they were having this problem more than others. Even though they knew that they had plenty of that present, the plants couldn't access it. They also had areas where they had salinity issues because of poor quality irrigation water. And so this is in the Garden City area. And of course we all share this problem that we have input costs increasing, including pumping the water and fertility costs. So this is what it looks like. I'm gonna break this into kind of a north grouping. So we had the blue circle is where they had their normal fertility program, about 100 pounds of nitrogen, and then against just PrairieFood, no fertility. And that wasn't something that we really recommended in the first year that they're trying PrairieFood, but that's what they did. And so it gave us the opportunity to really study what this system looks like and with a direct comparison. The south grouping was interesting because we had the same comparison with their normal fertility against PrairieFood, but there was also a third of their nutrient program blended with PrairieFood to see what that dynamic looked like. We took 3 sets of soil samples over the course of the growing season, so we got to see this progression through time that I'm going to show you today. In addition to that, not only did we do the Haney test that Lance was just talking about, we did run the PLFA tests, so we were able to watch the biology change over the course of this one growing season. So it's a really powerful study for us and a big learning experience. So what we saw, and I'm going to give you the data to prove this, is that the soil already started functioning better with just this one growing season with PrairieFood. We saw the nutrients increase in availability to the plant. We saw higher biomass, both above the ground and below the ground. And so if you're feeding animals, of course, that's very important. We saw soil organic matter move up with PrairieFood. And the all-important to us these days is that higher water holding capacity. And we're measuring that based on the increase in soil organic matter because physics dictates that soil or carbon absorbs water very easily. In the salinity issue, we did see mitigation of that. In the growing season, we saw the salinity numbers decline with PrairieFood where they went up where there was no PrairieFood. And then, of course, we decreased input costs, and PrairieFood price is stable. We're not tied to fossil fuel prices, and so that's a real advantage because it helps with planning. And so I'm going to show you some return on investment numbers based on that, okay? So in that north grouping is where that phosphorus was locked up. And so we have soil samples. These are the beginning and then middle and end of the growing season. So we see from the first soil sample period to about a month later, PrairieFood was put down at the beginning of August. So we saw a 17% increase in available phosphorus. So this is plant available phosphorus. And compared to that first point to post-harvest, we saw a 55% increase in available phosphorus. So that's kind of interesting because, the plants are using that nutrient, but we still see the availability of it increasing. So with the PLFA test, that was a really nice learning moment for me because I was able to understand better what was happening in the soils based on what the biology was doing. And so we ran the PLFA test on the same soil that we did the Haney tests on, okay? And so we saw the fungal populations increasing. And we know fungal populations are really good at solubilizing phosphorus. Makes sense, right? So remember, those also help transport nutrients to the plants, as Lance was just talking about. Thank you, Lance, for that whole background, so I don't have to get into that. He's the expert on that, not me. So another interesting result that we saw, so when we compared the first sample period to the last and looked at the change in nutrient availability, and this is nitrogen, the two fields that did not have PrairieFood are shown in orange. The fields with PrairieFood are shown in green. So you can see a clear pattern here that the biology was helping process nitrogen into a plant-available form, okay? Clear signal there. So we saw that functional diversity index. So that's something that Lance talked about. Diversity is key. And we saw that 14% higher in the PrairieFood treated fields. Remember, this is just the one growing season. And protozoa are detected for the first time. So Lance says that's not always a good thing when, that might be something you want to get rid of. But I submit if you have no protozoa, that means your diversity is really low, and they serve a purpose in the ecosystem. And so you want some of them. You don't want too many, because protozoa eat bacteria. And so if you start with a bacteria-dominated soil, which this was, then the protozoa will eat the bacteria that have a lot of nitrogen in their bodies. And so when they poop, they actually release nitrogen that's plant available. So they do aid in nitrogen cycling. Whoops. So we also saw the actinomycetes increase substantially with PrairieFood. That's the one that he talked about that was, it smells really good to us, but it's not so good for them. They're being disturbed when we smell them. But those particular organisms are very good nitrogen fixers. And so as a lot of people have talked about, we have 30,000 pounds of nitrogen, I think Keith said, above an acre of soil. If we can access that by partnering with biology, like these organisms, we can fix nitrogen from the air and get it down into the soil where it's plant available. Those guys also help inhibit pathogens. So we also saw the organic matter move. Now remember, this is just a few months. So normally when you measure organic matter, it would be over a 12-month period. But this is a really, really good sign, right? So remember, with PrairieFood are the green bars, and without PrairieFood are the orange bars. So you can see with PrairieFood on the south grouping, we were starting with lower organic matter, and we saw a really nice increase over the course of that growing season, whereas this field in particular started pretty high and decreased over time. We did see an increase over here, but we started higher too. So that really does matter. So that was a really surprising result. Now let me tell you a little bit more about this. They have been manuring, of course, year after year, because they're recycling some of those nutrients from the feed yard and getting it down on the fields to help with nutrients in their feed operation. That manure, we usually take that credit over years because it takes time for it to break down. What we saw was that there was this legacy of carbon with that manuring practice. And so when we got PrairieFood down on that ground, it moved the nutrients so much faster. The biology, once we got it kind of started and moving, it had that extra carbon from the manure to chew on and continue to grow and reproduce. So that was a really, really interesting synergy that we saw with manuring and PrairieFood. So the total living biomass, This is the biology, the microbes, 18% higher with PrairieFood. And then that ratio, we saw the protozoa coming back. The fungal populations really increased over the course of this few months. And that ratio that we talk about where you want to have the fungal populations start to balance out the bacterial populations also really improved quite a bit. So this is what I talked about earlier today. So the fields treated with PrairieFood were starting, it catalyzed the recovery of the biology. We could see that in both the soil results where we saw nutrient cycling and in our PLFA test. So we had more microbial biomass, higher functional diversity index, a burst in those nitrogen fixers. Those guys are present everywhere. I think Griffin said that. Everything is everywhere. All the biology is there. We just need to support it. We saw the increased fungal populations, and that's where that resiliency comes in with drought, because it holds onto water. Improved predator to prey ratio, and the fungi to bacteria ratio. So good stuff happening there, taking advantage of that whole food web instead of just that tiny cycle that we get with bacteria-dominated soils. So return on investment. So this is one of those things where I challenge you to think about this a little bit differently. Instead of just looking at input costs and yield, I want you to think about all the other benefits that are happening here. So with increasing nutrients being available, whether that's from a legacy of nitrogen inputs or coming from the atmosphere with the nitrogen fixation, that's a credit. That's nitrogen now that you don't have to pay for and put down. So I gave us a credit on nutrients. We built soil organic matter. Now we don't have to irrigate as much because we have that higher storage capacity. So that's included in this return on investment. And then, of course, I included the yield, which was about the same or slightly more with PrairieFood. And then, let's see, what else did I do here? Yeah, that's what I did. Soil organic matter, increased water holding capacity, better nutrient cycling, so there's a nutrient credit, and then the yield is that last one that we always count. And so in 2021, we saw just in that first year a higher return on investment with PrairieFood. And I used numbers from that time to project what the cost would be, and it's about the same. I checked the price of nitrogen to project what it would be in 2022. And because that nitrogen input's so high, now the return on investment's lower if you continue down that pathway versus if you're considering all the benefits, not just yield, you get that bigger number, that higher return on investment. So I'm going to introduce our teams. Something that's wonderful about PrairieFood is that we work really hard to understand what's happening in the soil. We've collected a lot of data. We've partnered with farmers. We've partnered with Kaufman for years. Thank you to Kaufman, to do some testing. We've partnered with farmers. We collect data, whether or not it's considered a research project. Part of our service is to do soil testing and plant tissue testing. And we also do greenhouse work, and we have a whole research team. So I wanted to introduce you to the data team. So we have, surprise. We have a couple of our data team members over here, Trisha Nag and Drew Minnis. Is Jamie here? Jamie's on the data team. She's also on the research team. So come and talk to them. They help behind the scenes with our Green Glove service. So Green Glove service is really where we talk to farmers about what their goals are. We understand regenerative techniques, so we find out what might work, see if somebody wants to try, just to, get started a little bit. Maybe they just want to try PrairieFood this year. So we do a field plan, and then we send out Heartland to do our soil samples. We always use third parties. They send those directly to the lab, and then the data team and the research team help with that data analysis. So the research team is Dr. Roberts. He spoke earlier today. He's our fearless leader. Jessica Hacker is our newest, she's back there, research team member. We have Shelby Beyer, who's about the same newness. Here she is. She's doing our greenhouse research. And Dave Bren is our wise advisor. When I checked out PrairieFood, he's back here in the corner. When I checked out PrairieFood, back when I lived in Pratt, and I was doing soil health work with building carbon in soils, and I heard about PrairieFood doing that in my town where I was living in Pratt at that time. I reached out to them, and on their website, Dave was listed as the wise advisor. And so he will forever be, to me, the wise advisor. We also have our soil health agronomists. So these guys are classically trained agronomists that have transformed the way they think to really focus on soil health to help farmers that, there's this paradigm shift. They're transformational agronomists, right, Mark? That's right. So we have Mike Chagru. Where are you, Mike? There you are. Could you please come up? And we have Mark Hins. Please come up as well. So they're going to help with answering some of the commonly asked questions. So don't have a background in farming. I truly am a soil scientist. I learn every day by talking to farmers and by learning from Mark and Mike, M&M. Come on up on stage. Don't be shy. No. So if you have those kinds of questions that you don't think I can answer, these are your guys right here.
I can stand down here. Yeah, you can.
One of the questions that we had earlier was about application.
Okay. That's one of the questions. Yep.
Okay.
Here's the first one. And I'm going to give this one to you, Mark, because you weren't afraid to come up on the stage. How, when, where, and to what crops is PrairieFood applied?
That's a loaded question. It depends. How is it applied? We've seen it through pivot application, but by and large, we see mostly ground application with sprayers. My previous job, I did chemical application as well, and so I can really relate to this because ground rigs, I think, is where it's at. We apply it with a ground rig, anywhere from 20 to 40 gallons per acre, and typically, I think the best results that I've seen so far have been with Turbo T20s, 22 and 24 nozzles, spaced at either 30 or 60 inches, depending on your pump and how you can handle it. It's a product that you really need to set your sprayer up correctly before you start, or it'll even teach a preacher how to cuss, okay? So you have to know how to handle it. And you want to pull those screens out, for example, and you really don't want to go through any type of pulsating nozzle. Just leave that out of the equation. This material is a suspension. It's not a solution, it is a suspension, and you want to treat it as such, okay?
And we have a team of certified PrairieFood applicators. If you don't want to mess with that, we have guys that know how to handle it and have successfully applied again and again.
Yes.
So how about when?
Typically before the next crop. I like to see it primarily because I think that's where we get our biggest bang for our buck. You can apply it in the off season depending on your timing for your farm situation and the volume of acres that you want to cover. But for sure, have it down just before the next intended crop so those roots can benefit from it, I think. And yeah, Mike?
Mike, do you want to talk about how we've seen some of the residue breakdown over the course of the following growing season after a fall application?
Yes, I can do that. You've heard a lot of discussion here today about the importance of that carbon to nitrogen ratio, and different residues have a different ratio. And so I think with irrigation especially, that water component is very important to enhance that breakdown process. So most of the acres that I was responsible for up in Nebraska and northeast Colorado were under irrigation. So you can go in and definitely see that residue from the former year, from the former crop, softening up. It's not going to just dissolve and go away, you know, in that first growing season, but you're going to definitely see that breakdown enhanced with irrigation and a prairie food application. The other thing I would add to what Mark just said about when to apply, just think of this. The other key principle you've all learned over the last couple of days is the importance of the living root in the soil. And what's that living root doing? It's supplying carbon for the biology. Think of the times of the year when you don't have a living root in the soil, and that's probably where the prairie food application has the best fit, spring, fall, when that crop's done growing and before you get a cover crop established. Those would be two great windows to consider a prairie food application.
But we've done it every month out of the year. So it's not phytotoxic. We've never seen it hurt anything. So it's when it's convenient for you, but these are the ideal times. We think that where you get the best bang for your buck, as Mike put it. What crops, guys?
Corn, beans,
A to Z.
A to Z, you know, you name it.
Yeah.
Wheat, cereal rye,
Pasture?
pasture, you betcha. You know, if it's a plant and it's photosynthesizing, it can benefit from prairie food. It's that simple.
Very good. Do we talk about that recommended rate?
Typically, if you are, you know, wanting to start the enhancement of the residue breakdown process, you could consider split applying the prairie food, 20 gallons in the fall and then 20 gallons in the spring. Our total rate that I guess we have started out with to get on in a single season is 40 gallons, but you can split that up. And again, it goes back to what Trish said about fitting in to your operation when you have the time to do that and the manpower and the equipment available to accomplish it. But the goal is 40 gallons in a season.
And where do we have prairie food down today? What's our geographic spread?
Well, all of Kansas, basically. Colorado.
Holyoke, Colorado area, northeast Colorado, where there's a lot of irrigation, coming down through the Platte Valley in Nebraska, Imperial, Cozad, Grand Island, Giltner, and then I think it was referenced in one of the presentations, we're working with GEVO up in the Brookings, South Dakota area in a project that they're developing a sustainable aviation fuel plant up there, and so.
And Oklahoma. There's
Oklahoma.
also in Oklahoma.
We sent some product to North Carolina, to New York in the past, Pennsylvania, New Jersey. It's gone out quite a few places.
And Mike's lawn, I know. Had
Mike's
some.
lawn, Rob's lawn.
That's one of the pictures up there scrolling on the screen. So there is a good picture there. When we were talking about application, you can see 2 row crop sprayers. If you want to stand and watch and see the pattern of 40 gallons to the acre coming out, there's a couple short video clips over here in our booth.
I was on a four-wheeler and was on one of Chris's fields, and I made sure and stayed upwind of the boom because I didn't want to take a bath in it. But it didn't smell that bad either. So, you know, once you know the smell of progress, you don't mind it so bad either.
In full disclosure, it's smelly when you're applying it, but then once it's down on the ground, it's not really noticeable. So we're on a golf course in Wichita right now, and that was one of the, concerns. If we put this down early in the morning, is everyone going to suffer all day? But it's not like that. It really is pretty neutralized right away.
If you've got sensitive neighbors, it does not have a lingering odor to it at all once it dries on the plant residue or the soil. Whereas spreading 20 ton of beef manure out there, if that lays on top of the ground, you're going to smell that for a month just from all the ammonia coming off of it and the odor. So this is not going to do that. It'll be disappear in a hurry.
Yeah, so it's not caustic or phytotoxic. I saw it go on some grain sorghum, for example. That was V4 to V6 at the time. And yeah, you can see where it was on the leaf tissue, but there was no phytotoxicity whatsoever. It was safe as can be. So very nice product.
Well, we're registered in 48 states. Pauline, did you have a question about that?
Yeah. You mentioned PrairieFood is in suspension.
In suspension.
Be diluted and be part of irrigation.
Yeah, we've put it down through a pivot before, actually a couple of times. As far as a dilution, it's going to get diluted because of the volume of water, the sheer mass of water that's going through that irrigation system. In fact, to keep it in suspension when you're doing, I guess I'll call it fertigation, you probably want it like a submersible pump inside that tank just to keep it moving. Just keep it moving so that it doesn't gel up. And you know what's interesting too, when we're running through that pivot, you can't smell it. I mean, it's immaterial, so it's really not that big a deal.
Yeah.
Actually, I think it smells good. Kind of like back to Lance's talk about actinomyces,
Yeah.
I like that. So.
Well, and there's soluble carbon compounds in the liquid portion. It's a slurry, and so there are some solids, and that's the part that needs to be in suspension, the larger carbon molecules that can't be solubilized in water. And so it's really, we don't have issues with shelf life. It's not caustic. We do recommend that you rinse out your spray equipment overnight if you're going to, spray 2 days in a row, something like that. We're registered in 48 states. Did I answer all the questions? It's really, if you get it on your skin, you want to take a shower because it'll smell, but it's not going to burn you or anything like that. Yeah. My husband's had it in his eyes and in his mouth because he was one of the first guys to make PrairieFood at the plant. And the only complaint I have is that he smelled when he got home at night. He never got pink eye or anything. There's no pathogens. It's completely sterile. Jamie. The application rules?
Oh,
Yeah,
sure.
Mark alluded to that earlier, but I guess I'll boil it down. I like to use, maybe Lance would use this terminology, call it naked spraying, or spraying naked. You want to pull all the technology off the boom. Okay, he mentioned you don't want the pulsating nozzles on there. You don't want screens anywhere in the system. You want to just have an open line and a big nozzle because your goal is to just get that 40 gallon an acre distributed across the field. It's not precision application like a herbicide and having to have fine droplets. The coarse droplets are fine, 60-inch nozzle spacings are fine. You're just trying to spread that out and get it on the field. Yeah. So, how do we treat what? Yes, clean out. I mean, basically just rinsing multiple times with water, just flushing it and running water through the system. I did have one applicator in Nebraska say that he ran thiazole through the sprayer and it kind of acted like a cleaner and removed some of the residue that may have built up in the elbows and in the crevices of the tank or whatever. So that was just a little tidbit from an applicator that's used thiazole before to clean other products out of his system.
One other thing you can think about with all the dicamba that's been applied with our sprayers and stuff too, you want to make sure that sprayer is clean before you put your PrairieFood in there because it'll also help clean it out. It's kind of like my dad used to say, yeah, you got to have some fiber in you to scratch your guts out. Well, this thing's got plenty of fiber and it'll scratch your guts out. Okay? So keep that sprayer clean before you use it and keep it clean after you're done.
Yeah, that's good.
Our next question is, how is PrairieFood different from manure, humic acid? I got a question about molasses earlier, biochar. These are all carbon-rich soil amendments, and they're beneficial to the soil, but PrairieFood has all of that. Mm-hmm. It's a diverse food source for soil biology. It's all the way from those small sugar-sized molecules all the way up to what you could characterize as like microchar, because there's those solid carbon particles in PrairieFood. And so you get that huge diversity in carbon molecules, all those things, and so many more, thousands of more carbon molecules. So you're feeding the diversity of life in the soil, from the earthworms to the bacteria.
Yeah. Yeah, I like it because you have the simple carbon compounds to the complex, which is, I think, a precursor for all of the good guys in the soil to come to the dinner table at the same time. I like it.
Yeah.
And I might have to give Lance credit for this analogy that I use a lot. I can't remember, I didn't come up with it on my own. But just think of raw manure, a hunk of manure that you're broadcasting across the field, as a T-bone steak that you put in front of a toddler. The nutrition's there in that steak, but is that toddler going to benefit from it? Because he can't eat it and digest it. So think of PrairieFood as a pureed steak. You're going to make it available for that toddler to eat. The microbiome's going to be able to eat the microcarbons versus just throwing a hunk of manure out there and expecting it over time to be available. Mm-hmm. Did that come from you, Lance? I'm giving feeding poop to toddlers.
How does soil type impact results?
Well, first of all, PrairieFood can be applied anywhere from sand, silts, and clays. Let's make that very clear. Mm-hmm. But I think due to the nature of the microflora in the soil, and maybe I'll stand corrected on this, but I think I see the biggest impact on some of my more poor soils. I think I have a greater chance of impact. I don't want to say poor, I want to say lighter textured soils. I want to say that you'll probably see a higher potential for a more immediate response on the sandier soils. The heavier clay soils, I think you'll still see a response, but it might take a little bit longer before you start to realize that, yes, there is a treatment difference. Now, having said that, looking at plants, both in sands and or clays, you can still see that rich rhizosphere around each root. And it's exciting when you go out there and you can tell it right to the row. You can look at the roots and you can see the microflora that's building up around those roots, you know. And it's exciting to see how when you dig a plant out of the ground, you got all this other soil that's hanging on. And that's because of the glue, basically, that's all the friends are hanging together. They're all working together and they're providing the mothership with an exchange of food, you know, getting carbon and they're getting sugar and so on. I mean, it's just phenomenal to see it out in the field. So.
Yeah, PrairieFood is down on a lot of different types of soils and a lot of different places. The one that we don't have a lot of data on are the heavier soils. Mm-hmm. So we're actually going to be down on heavier soils this spring so that we can study that better.
Good.
Trish, the only thing I would like to add there is on low organic matter sandier soils. I would encourage you as you start the transition process to keep your starter fertilizer in the program until you get the organic matter going the direction we want it to go in increasing the field. We have seen, I've had a customer demonstrate this to me, is why I bring it up. On 2% or less organic matter soil, we still see a good response, keeping that starter, whether it's 2x2 or in furrow, in his program. And then he's transitioning, trying to reduce his nitrogen on the backside after the PrairieFood application. But up front, in year 1, year 2, there still seems to be a need with a starter on low organic matter soils.
And we've seen really good results on low organic matter and sandy soils to couple with lots of manure. So that synergy with manure is we've seen really good results with increase in soil organic matter in year 1. Mm-hmm. Can we still use synthetics?
Absolutely. I think they kind of go hand in hand. The synthetic end, you know, we've substituted a need for some of the biology in the soil by utilizing urea and hydrous ammonia, those type of things. But wow, I mean, we're throwing a resource away by not including PrairieFood in your system. Using PrairieFood in that system will start to enable you to start looking at reducing your nitrogen consumption. And I really think, you've got microbes already in the soil, folks. Why not wake them up, have them work for you? Don't work against them, work with them. So yes, I think you should use them together.
I think the key is dosage. Several of the soil health experts from around the world will tell you when you listen to their presentations to try to keep your increments low. For nitrogen, for example, 30 pounds is kind of a good number to use to add to the system of a PrairieFood application, but not to such a high dose to where you're a detriment to the soil biology and the microbiome. It still maintains the activity, but yet you're just kind of spoon feeding the nitrogen at lower rates. And again, this is key, I think, in those early years of whatever practice you're trying to implement as you're weaning off, is to maybe make those transitions in small increments and maybe even do your own testing on a given field and put out your normal rate and a reduced rate, 20% reduction, 40% reduction, and put a couple strips in a field and prove it to yourself on that piece of ground. Because every piece of ground is going to be different as you transition through this soil health journey.
What about a particular type of synthetic? Is one better than another? I want to answer this a little bit. We did have a really good side-by-side look at PrairieFood on a system compared to anhydrous and PrairieFood with anhydrous. And the side that did not have anhydrous performed much better, especially when we looked at the biological metrics. So that anhydrous application just seemed to hold down the biological activity. Whereas on the PrairieFood side, we saw, it increasing. And so that would be one that I'd say it does make a difference.
I would counter-argue that, a corn plant doesn't care where that nitrogen comes from, okay?
But the biology does.
Well, the biology does. The corn plant says, hey, give me nitrate nitrogen or give me ammonium. I don't care which. I'll take your nitrogen, I'll build my proteins with whatever. But I like the soil biology side of it because I want that to grow together with the plant. So I'll give you the nod on that one. Thank you.
Is there a plateau? We might want to bring Lance up here to help us out with this. Lance, you're
Right.
up.
Well, if he's transitioning up here, I think it was mentioned earlier, what our prairie soils were like in this country before the plow came, and I think it was noted, maybe Rob had it in his presentation, I believe it was 10 to 12%, could have been as high as 15 in some of the prairie soils. So I guess if we're talking about building the soil back up, that would be a good goal to start with. But I think Lance mentioned he's working with a customer in South Carolina and North Carolina. He's already at 42%. And what did he say he wanted to do? He wants to keep growing.
Keep building.
So I don't know if there's a limit, but that's a good goal for us in this part of the world that are sitting at 2% average to say we want to get back to 10 to 12. That would be awesome.
Yeah.
And then you see all the benefits that result from that with water holding capacity and nutrient cycling.
I don't know if there is a plateau. I don't know, because we really haven't applied our mindset yet. Going beyond, can you imagine farming 15% organic mattered soils? I mean, that's crazy. That's awesome. What a blessing that would be. And, with our ideas and the technology today that we have, the ability of our planners to go through and so forth, why quit at 15%? Why not push it to 25, 30, 40%? Why not? I think it'd just be a plus, no matter what you did there.
Lance, one of the questions we get quite a bit from growers is there a plateau for soil organic matter, and does soil actually balance itself?
Yes. There is a plateau, but we are far, far, far from it.
Yeah.
There are constraints within. Think of it like yield potential. I know everybody would love to figure out the 400 bushel corn thing, right? But there is a plateau limit based on your environment. In some environments, it's attainable to maybe try to think that we can get there consistently, but in other environments, it's not. And so it's the same thing here. There is a limit when it comes to carbon storage and things like that. But again, we're far from it. What do we say? 1.5% to 2% here now. Historically, 14, 13, 15. East to west. Those are the types of things to shoot for. Don't hear those. I mentioned that guy earlier in North Carolina, 41%, 42%.
Yeah.
This is the coastal slopes of North Carolina. That shouldn't be your target here, right?
Yeah.
And then as far as the balance, I get this question all the time, actually, and I'm thinking of it more from like a nutrient balance standpoint. I don't know what you really mean by balance in the question, but all ecosystems and all living organisms strive for homeostasis, right? So if you get up and start running around this room, you're going to start sweating. Your body's trying to cool itself down, trying to maintain a balance. And microbes do the same thing. Soils are going to do the same thing. Organic matter, for example, has a C/N ratio somewhere between 10 to 1 and 12 to 1. I don't need to measure it. I don't care where it came from. It doesn't matter if it's soil in Canada or in Brazil. That's what Mother Nature balances C/N ratio to be in organic matter. So yeah, there's a lot of balance in the system that's going to just occur over time.
What about the biology?
Yeah, so the biology, will it balance? You're going to find, balance is one term for it. What you're going to find is an ebb and flow. So in certain times, you're going to have a lot more bacteria, which are prey items, for example, prey items for protozoans. And so then what happens is you have this boom of predators. So, and then when the predators go up, the bacteria go down. And you'll have these big swings for a while, but then when you get a system that's humming pretty good, that moderates itself. So you just get this with the biology instead of this. And so it will kind of self-balance, but it won't just lock in. There will be up and down to it.
Dynamic equilibrium.
Yes, that's the term I was looking for. Thank
There
you,
it is.
Doc.